In 1954, a woman could end her day standing in front of a small mirror with only a few things in reach: a jar of cold cream, a folded tissue or a bit of cotton, a clean washcloth, maybe a bottle of rose water nearby. That was often enough. She did not have a shelf crowded with acids, serums, masks, tools, peeling pads, and 10-step routines that changed every few months. Still, many women managed to keep their skin calm, soft, and presentable with habits so ordinary that they hardly looked like beauty tricks at all. That is what makes them so easy to miss now. The old method was not built around chasing perfection. It was built around steadiness, restraint, and knowing what your own face could handle. If old beauty knowledge like this still speaks to you, subscribe and stay close. There is a lot of quiet wisdom from earlier generations that made daily life simpler, and much of it still has something useful to say. One of the biggest differences between then and now was not only the products, it was the mood around them. Modern skincare often feels tense. People are told to fix dullness, fix pores, fix texture, fix lines, fix redness, fix oil, fix dryness, and fix all of it quickly. The 1950s approach was usually slower. A woman often used the same few items night after night, long enough to understand what they actually did. She was not always looking for a stronger formula. In many homes, skincare was less like a project and more like a routine done almost without fuss. The same way a vanity drawer was opened and closed at the same time every evening. The first vanished trick was the simplest one of all: cold cream as a full cleansing ritual, not just an extra product sitting around for decoration. A thick cream was massaged over the face to loosen makeup, powder, city dust, oil, and the long day itself. Then it was wiped away carefully. That step mattered. It was not splashed on and rushed off. It was worked into the skin with patience and removed with equal care. Many women trusted it because it cleaned without leaving the face feeling scraped raw. The goal was not to make the skin feel tight. Tight skin might feel clean for a moment, but it can also be a sign that too much has been stripped away. That old habit still makes sense today in principle. Skin usually does better when it is cleaned thoroughly but gently. That does not mean every old cold cream formula will suit every modern face, and it does not mean newer cleansers are bad. It simply means those women understood something basic that is easy to forget. Cleansing is supposed to remove what does not belong on the skin, not punish the skin for having needs. A face rubbed too harshly, washed too often, or hit with strong products too quickly can become more reactive, not less. And once you notice that, a lot of the 1950s method starts to look less old-fashioned and more sensible. The second trick was not really a product at all. It was the discipline of removing makeup fully every night, even when the day was over and nobody else would see the difference. That sounds small, but it shaped the whole routine. Makeup in the 1950s often had a very finished look. Powder, lipstick, eyeliner, and face products were part of daily presentation for many women. Yet the expectation in many homes was that the face should be properly cleaned before bed. The day had a beginning and an ending. Public face first, private care later. Now think about how often modern skincare trouble begins with fatigue. People get home late, leave makeup on, fall asleep, wake up irritated, then try to correct the damage with more products. The old rhythm aimed to stop that cycle before it started. The trick was not glamorous, it was simply consistent. A woman stood at the mirror, took the time to wipe everything away, and let her skin rest. Do you remember seeing that kind of nightly ritual in your mother's or grandmother's bathroom? Not a rushed scrub, but a quiet winding down at the mirror. The third trick was even easier to overlook because it lived in the hands. Many women were taught to handle the face gently, using soft upward or outward motions rather than rough dragging. Some of that advice was mixed with beauty culture and old ideas that were not always scientific in the way they were explained, but the behavior itself had value. Gentle handling can reduce needless friction. Rubbing, yanking, and scrubbing the same areas again and again can leave skin angry, especially around the eyes and mouth. The women at those vanities did not always speak in modern skincare language, but they often practiced a kind of physical restraint that still matters. That is one of the most interesting things about these old tricks. They were often less about a miracle ingredient and more about the way the routine was done. Slow hands, clean cloths, repeated motions, the same jar in the same place. A face that was cared for every night instead of attacked once a week in frustration. There was also another quiet rule behind many of these routines. Do not keep touching your face all day. A woman could fix her lipstick, powder her nose, or check the mirror, but the face itself was not always treated like something to poke, pick, and study every hour. That habit alone may have spared some skin from needless irritation. Today, people often examine every pore in bright bathroom light, lean close to magnifying mirrors, and start pressing at spots that might have settled down on their own. The 1950s routine at its best leaned in the other direction. Clean it, care for it, leave it alone. That does not mean the era was perfect. Some women used products that would be too harsh for certain skin types today, and beauty standards in that time could bring their own pressure. But inside all of that, there were practical habits worth noticing. Many women were not buying peace from their skin with endless variety. They were building peace by keeping the routine simple enough to repeat. And that may be the part modern skincare keeps losing. Not knowledge, not ingredients, rhythm. A crowded shelf can give the feeling of control, but it can also make the face into one more problem to manage. A smaller routine leaves less room for panic. It lets you observe. It lets you notice whether your skin is dry, tired, overworked, or doing just fine. In the 1950s, that kind of observation often happened in a small private moment at the end of the day, with a cream jar, a mirror, and a practiced hand that knew when to stop. Once the face was cleaned and settled, the next step was often even lighter and, in some ways, even more revealing, because the women who used these routines did not always reach for more product. Sometimes they reached for something cool, simple, and just enough. Once the face was clean, many 1950s women did something that feels almost strange now. They stopped, or at least they paused. They did not always move immediately into layer after layer of treatment. The skin had been cleaned, the makeup had been taken off, and now the goal was often to freshen, calm, and settle it. And that small difference matters. A great deal of modern skincare is built on the idea that more steps must mean better care. But many of the vanished tricks from the 1950s worked because they respected a limit. They gave the skin attention but not endless interference. One of the most common habits was using a simple skin freshener such as rosewater or witch hazel. Not in the overloaded way people talk about toners now, with promises to shrink pores, transform texture, and reset the face in seconds. In many cases, it was just a light finishing step. A woman would apply a bit to cotton, pass it gently over the skin, and enjoy the feeling of coolness and cleanliness. The point was not to wage war on the face. The point was to leave it feeling awake, neat, and refreshed. That old habit still has something to teach, even if modern skin types and product formulas vary. People often do better when they stop expecting every product to do 10 jobs at once. A simple freshening step can feel soothing partly because it stays in its lane. It does not have to be dramatic to be useful. A little coolness, a little lightness, and then the routine moves on. The women using these products were often not trying to force the skin into a new condition overnight. They were helping it return to balance after powder, weather, and the day's buildup. The same goes for another vanished trick that sounds almost too plain to matter. Cold water or a cool cloth for puffiness and morning heaviness. Many women kept this habit as part of waking up or settling the face before makeup. A splash of cool water, a cloth pressed lightly over the eyes, a brief moment of refreshment before the mirror. It was cheap, immediate, and built into the routine so naturally that nobody needed to market it as a breakthrough. That is part of what makes these old habits so easy to overlook. They solved small problems before those problems became a whole category of products. Of course, cool water is not magic. It will not erase every sign of fatigue, or replace medical care or treatment when something deeper is going on. but it can help the face feel less swollen and more alert. And that kind of simple practical help was the backbone of many 1950s routines. Women often worked with what was right in front of them: water, cloth, time, a familiar bottle on the vanity, a hand that had done the same motion hundreds of times before. There was also a larger lesson hidden inside these habits. The skin was not supposed to be in a constant state of correction. It was supposed to be maintained. That is very different from the way many people live with skincare now. The modern routine can feel restless. One week is about exfoliation, the next is about repairing the barrier. Then comes brightening, resurfacing, slugging, peeling, cycling, and trying to decode whether irritation means progress or damage. A woman in the 1950s might not have used those words, but many of her habits reflected a simpler truth. Skin often responds better when it is not pushed so hard. That is where the idea of letting the skin rest comes in. This is one of the most vanished tricks of all because it does not look like a trick. It looks like doing less. In many homes, skincare did not continue all night with fresh applications every hour. Once the face was cleaned and lightly freshened, that was often enough until a small amount of cream was used where it was truly needed. The skin had room to breathe. It was not being challenged at every step. And that leads to another old habit that still makes sense today: using night cream sparingly. Not slathered on as though more product must mean more benefit, but applied with purpose. Dry spots, delicate areas, places that needed a little help. That kind of restraint is easy to underestimate, especially now when product use is often encouraged by abundance. Yet a lighter hand can prevent the face from feeling greasy, congested, or overwhelmed. It can also encourage a person to pay attention. Where is the dryness really happening? What actually needs support? What can be left alone? That kind of observation used to be part of beauty skill. A woman learned her face over time. She knew when winter air changed it. She knew when fatigue showed up under the eyes. She knew when too much powder had left the cheeks looking flat. The old routines were not always scientifically explained in modern language, but they often grew out of repetition and notice. That gave them a kind of grounded wisdom. They were not driven by trend cycles every few weeks. They were shaped by what seemed to work, what felt comfortable, and what could be repeated without turning the bathroom into a chemistry lab. When skincare becomes too crowded, people can lose that sense of familiarity with their own face. Every new bottle interrupts the conversation. Every strong treatment can blur the answer to a simple question: is my skin better or just busy? The 1950s approach, at least in its calmer forms, created fewer variables. It made it easier to see cause and effect. This cream feels soothing. That splash of cool water helps in the morning. Too much cleansing leaves the face tight. Too much fuss makes the skin harder to read. When did skincare stop being a calm habit and start feeling like a second job? That question matters because many of the old tricks were really habits of restraint disguised as beauty advice. Women were not always told to keep adding. Often they were told to be gentle, be regular, and avoid excess. That does not mean every old bottle on a dressing table deserves to come back exactly as it was. Some formulas from the past would be too harsh or simply outdated now, and some ingredients deserve more caution than they received at the time. The point is not to copy every label. The point is to notice the logic underneath. Freshen the skin without stripping it. Cool it without shocking it. Moisturize what needs help. Do not turn every night into a fight with your own face. There was also something emotionally different about these routines. They were often quiet. A woman at her vanity was not only trying to improve her skin, she was closing the day in an orderly way. The small bottle, the cotton, the cool cloth, the little touch of cream, all belonged to a rhythm that said enough is enough. That rhythm itself may have done some good, not on the skin alone, but on the whole feeling of care. A habit that calms the mind can sometimes keep a person from doing too much to the face in the name of helping it. And once you start to see that, the most useful 1950s skincare tricks begin to look less like secret formulas and more like a forgotten form of self-control. The real skill was not only knowing what to use, it was knowing when to stop. And many women carried that same discipline beyond the cream jar and the washcloth, into the things they kept clean, the sunlight they respected, and the daily beauty habits they refused to neglect. Some of the most effective skincare tricks from the 1950s were not creams, tonics, or bottles at all. They were protective habits. They lived in laundry baskets, bathroom shelves, bedroom windows, powder cases, and ordinary rules repeated so often that they became automatic. That is one reason they disappeared so quietly. A product can be marketed and revived. A habit usually vanishes without a trace once the rhythm around it breaks. And yet many women kept their skin looking steady not only because of what they applied, but because of what they prevented. One of those vanished habits was keeping the things that touched the face cleaner than many people do now. Pillowcases were changed and refreshed regularly. Face towels were not always left damp and hanging for days. Powder puffs, makeup sponges, and little applicators were often treated as personal items that needed care. In many homes, this was not described as skincare science. It was simply part of keeping oneself neat. But the effect still matters. Anything that touches the face over and over can carry old oil, powder, dirt, and residue back onto the skin. A woman in the 1950s may not have spoken in the language of bacteria, barrier support, or contamination, but she often understood that stale cloth and old buildup had no place near freshly cleaned skin. That old rule still makes a great deal of sense. People now can spend a small fortune on skincare while pressing their face into a pillowcase that should have been changed days ago. They buy expensive creams and then dry their skin with the same hand towel everyone in the house has touched. The old routine did not always separate beauty from household order. Clean skin belonged to a clean cloth, and a clean cloth belonged to the larger discipline of the home. That is part of what made the system work. The face was not treated like an isolated problem. It was connected to the sheets, the towels, the laundry, and the bathroom habits around it. Another vanished trick was a more cautious relationship with the sun, even before sunscreen became a daily ritual in the modern sense. This point needs care because not every woman in the 1950s protected her skin well, and sun habits varied greatly. Some beauty culture still encouraged tanning in certain years and circles. But many women, especially those concerned with preserving a smooth and even complexion, treated strong sun with more suspicion than people sometimes assume. Hats, gloves, time in the shade, and simple avoidance of too much direct exposure were often part of ordinary presentation. Skin that looked red, weathered, or uneven was not always seen as desirable. What matters here is the principle. A good number of women protected their faces not only with products, but with habits of covering, timing, and caution. They were not necessarily following modern dermatology advice in the form we know today, and no one should treat the past as a complete guide to sun safety. Still, the instinct to shield the face from harsh exposure was often stronger than the modern idea that everything can be corrected later with a treatment. The older mindset leaned more toward preserving what you had. That same mindset showed up in another simple rule: never let makeup become yesterday's problem. Makeup was part of beauty, but it was not supposed to stay on the skin longer than it should. Once the public part of the day was over, the face was supposed to return to itself. Powder came off, creams were wiped away, lipstick was removed. The mirror was part of closing the day properly. Today, some people pile new product over tired skin, touch up over old layers, and fall asleep still wearing what should have been cleaned off hours earlier. That cycle can leave the face feeling heavy and neglected at the same time. The 1950s habit was different. Makeup had a place, and bare skin had a place too. A woman might take pride in looking polished, but the skin underneath still needed to be cared for in its own right. That separation may sound small, yet it created a healthier rhythm. The face was allowed to reset. It was not always carrying the remains of the whole day into the next one. There was also the vanished trick of using occasional home treatments without turning them into constant punishment. A simple mask now and then, light steam in moderation, A quiet evening treatment done once in a while because the skin looked tired or needed softening. The key word there is occasional. Many women use these things as maintenance, not obsession. They were not chasing daily transformation. They were supporting the skin gently, then going back to the regular routine. Modern routines often lose that sense of proportion. People can start to believe that if a mask helps once a week, then more must be better. If exfoliation improves texture, then stronger exfoliation must improve it faster. If one active ingredient works, 3 layered together must work harder. The old habits remind us that skin usually responds best to steadiness, not force. An occasional treatment can feel helpful. Constant interference often leaves the face confused, dry, or irritated. And then there was one of the strongest skincare tricks of all, even though it looks almost too plain to count: sticking with what worked. Many 1950s women did not switch products every 2 weeks. They did not rebuild their routine because of a passing fashion or a new promise on a label. If a cream suited them, they kept it. If a cleanser felt comfortable, they stayed with it. If something irritated the skin, it was set aside. That level of consistency gave the skin a fair chance to respond, and it gave the woman using it a clearer sense of cause and effect. Today, routines often change faster than skin can settle. That creates a strange kind of confusion. A person may not know whether the redness comes from over-cleansing, over-exfoliating, a new serum, poor sleep, stress, or simple impatience. The old approach did not eliminate every problem, but it reduced the noise. It made skincare easier to read. This product feels fine, that one does not. This habit calms the skin, that one leaves it angry. A slower routine made those answers easier to trust. Do modern routines sometimes create more stress than results? That question sits near the center of all this, because the real 1950s trick was not blind loyalty to the past. It was discipline, maintenance before crisis, care before damage, consistency before panic. Many women were trying to keep the skin from getting into trouble rather than trying to rescue it after days of neglect and overcorrection. That attitude shaped everything from clean pillowcases to removed makeup to time spent out of harsh sun. And once you see that pattern, the old vanity begins to reveal something bigger. Those jars and cloths were only part of the story. The deeper lesson was that beauty was often treated as a skill built into daily life. It was not just bought off a shelf, it was practiced in small, repeated actions, in knowing what to protect, what to clean, and what to leave alone. That older way of thinking may be the most vanished skincare trick of all, and it leads straight into the final piece of the story, where beauty meant something far steadier than shopping. What made so many of these vanished skincare tricks work was not only the cream, the water, the bottle, or even the simple textured cloth. It was the fact that beauty in the 1950s was often treated as a skill. A woman learned her face the way she learned how much starch a blouse could handle, how long a pie needed in her own oven, or which drawer held the good handkerchiefs. In the end, she simply paid attention. She repeated what worked, day after day. She noticed what needed adjusting. That kind of knowledge was ordinary, quiet, and easy to dismiss. But it gave many women something modern routines often fail to give at all: familiarity with their own skin. One vanished trick, if it can even be called a trick, was using fewer products, long enough to know what they actually did. That sounds almost obvious, yet it cuts against the whole mood of modern beauty culture. Today, a person can buy 5 new products in 1 week and never give any of them a fair chance to show their effect. The bathroom shelf changes faster than the face itself. In the 1950s, many women worked within narrower limits. They often had one cream they trusted, one cleanser or cold cream they stayed with, one powder, one lipstick, perhaps one freshener, and that was enough to build a routine around. This did not make every woman's skin perfect, nothing does, but it made the routine readable. That matters more than people think. A routine becomes useful when a person can connect result to cause. This cream softens the dry areas around my mouth. Too much cleansing leaves my cheeks tight. A cool cloth helps the eyes look less tired. Sleeping with makeup on makes my skin feel heavy the next day. Those observations come from repetition. They come from staying with a few things long enough to learn. The old beauty skill was not constant experimentation, it was memory. There was also another vanished principle hidden inside those routines. Skincare belonged to an evening rhythm, not a panic response. A woman did not always wait until her face felt irritated, tired, or visibly troubled before doing something about it. The care was built into the close of day. Makeup came off. The skin was cleaned, a little freshening, a little cream where needed, and then rest. The rhythm itself prevented neglect. Beauty was not always an emergency repair project. It was part of order. That is one reason the old vanity scene still feels so striking. A jar, a cloth, a mirror, a woman standing there in the quiet of her own room. There is nothing flashy about it. Yet inside that small scene is a kind of discipline many people have lost. The face was not forgotten all week and then attacked on Sunday night with a pile of treatments. It was tended in small, regular motions, not perfect care, not magical care, just steady care. And steady care often does more good than dramatic effort that arrives too late. When did beauty stop being a skill you practiced and start feeling like something you had to keep buying? That shift changed more than spending habits. It changed confidence. A woman who knows her routine and knows her own face can move through it with calm. A woman who feels she is always missing the latest solution never really settles. The 1950s system at its best gave women a narrower lane. That lane had its own pressures, and it is important to be honest about that. The era was not easy. Many women faced social expectations about appearance that could be exhausting and unfair. The point is not to pretend the whole beauty culture was harmless. The point is to notice that inside those limits there were useful skills, and many of those skills had little to do with spending more. Another vanished piece of the old system was the way knowledge moved from one woman to another. Not always in lectures, not always in written instructions. Often it happened through watching. A daughter saw how her mother removed makeup. She noticed how little cream was used instead of half the jar at once. She learned that pillowcases mattered, that a face towel should be clean, that tired skin should be treated gently, not scrubbed out of frustration. These things were passed through repetition and presence. They were absorbed in small domestic scenes that did not look important at the time. That may be why so many of these routines still feel emotionally charged now. A cold cream jar on a dressing table is not only a product, it is a memory object. A bottle of rose water is not only a freshener, it carries the shape of a hand reaching for it at night. A clean folded cloth near a mirror says something about order, self-respect, and the closing of a day. The old tricks survived not because they were marketed brilliantly, but because they lived inside ordinary life, and that is why some of them still work today. Not every old formula deserves to come back exactly as it was. Some ingredients from the past call for more caution now. Some products were better suited to certain skin types than others. Some beauty advice from that era leaned too hard on pressure or outdated ideas, but the larger principles still hold up remarkably well. Clean the skin gently, remove makeup fully, use a light hand, keep the things that touch the face clean, respect the sun, resist the urge to do too much, stay consistent long enough to know what helps. Let the face rest. Those principles are not exciting in the modern commercial sense. They do not create endless novelty. They do not turn skincare into a performance. They do something quieter. They return beauty to habit, and that may be exactly why they feel so fresh again now. Many people are tired of routines that promise transformation but leave the skin overwhelmed. The vanished 1950s method offers a different kind of relief. It suggests that a cared-for face may come less from chasing more and more solutions, and more from removing what does not need to be there. Maybe that is the deepest lesson in all of this. The women who stood at those vanities were not always following a trend. Many of them were maintaining a relationship with their own face. They knew its moods. They knew the small signs of dryness, puffiness, fatigue, and irritation. They had fewer products, but they often had more continuity, and continuity can be powerful. A face that is handled gently, cleaned properly, and left in peace has a better chance to settle into itself. If any of these old routines remind you of your mother, your grandmother, or a little bathroom shelf that always seemed simple and orderly, say so in the comments. The most interesting part of these vanish tricks may be how many families once treated them as normal. In the end, the real secret was probably never hidden in one miracle jar. It was in the rhythm around that jar. The clean sink, the folded cloth, the small pause at the mirror before bed. The woman who knew that care did not have to be complicated to be real. She closed the lid, set the cream back in its place, and left the room looking almost plain. But the plainness was the skill. Everything was there because it was used, and used because it worked. If forgotten beauty knowledge like this still matters to you, subscribe before you go. There is a lot more old wisdom worth keeping, and some of the best of it was once passed along in quiet rooms, one simple habit at a time.